The Biden administration retreats on COVID. They know the Republicans are coming in hot. They're planning on beating the Biden administrations peacefully and politically with their COVID mania, saying, look what you have done to our country. We're going to undo all of this. And they're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And so what does the Biden administration do? They want to preempt that. They want to sort of take the wind out of the sails of the Republicans, and they want to announce, oh, well, we're going to end COVID anyway. So maybe you guys shouldn't look into what we spent, look into what we did, look into any of our constitutional violations, look how you wrecked our economy, and so on and so forth. We just are going to end it. Can we just be friends? Just let bygones be bygones? Well, we'll see. The White House made their announcement. We're going to analyze it and then see what the Congress is doing, because the Republicans, of course, are now in charge of the House of Representatives, and they're going to be coming in hot. And we'll go through a bunch of clips from many of them. But first, let's take a look at the background here. Biden backpedaling on COVID. This article comes over from Reuters. They say, posted on January 31st, U.S. is going to be ending the COVID-19 emergency declarations on May 11th. That's really great. All right, so officially it's going to be done, as apparently what our leaders tell us now. That's nice that they're educating us about this. President Joe Biden administration on Monday said it's going to end the emergency declaration. Nearly 3 years after the United States imposed sweeping measures to curb the spread of the illness, or to pretend to do that. The COVID-19 national emergency, they were put in place by Trump. Biden has repeatedly extended the measures, which allowed millions of Americans to get free tests, vaccines, and treatments and other things. But the White House Office of Management and Budget said in a statement the declarations, which were set to expire in the coming months, would be extended again until May 11th and then terminated. In their statement, they said the wind down would align with the administration's previous commitments to give 60 days notice prior to terminating all this stuff. It's also going to have some implications known as Title 42. And they're having to deal with that story as well. So all of that is coming, right? May 11th. The big question is, what is this stuff going to actually do? It's going to be expiring a bunch of benefits. We'll take a look at what those are. But remember, Joe Biden's already told us that the pandemic was over. This was the president back in September 2022 telling us that the pandemic was over. So why do we have to wait until May to end it now?
Mr. President, first Detroit Auto Show in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over.
Great.
If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, they do seem to be in pretty good shape. That guy standing next to a Lamborghini, he's in really good shape. All right, so there's a declaration that we had in September 2022, but now it's going to end in May. We have questions about what's ultimately going to be ending, what sort of benefits are going to go away. We've been living in this weird state of perpetual militant COVID medical hysteria for the last 3 years. A lot of people are pretty baked into that system, right? We've talked about this here with student loans. Many people, headlines all over the place, are saying that people are living paycheck to paycheck. Credit cards are maxed out. People are seeing inflation, right? Actual inflation that's hitting their groceries at 12 to 15% in different places around this country. What happens now when these student loans, which were on pause for the last 3 years, just turn on again? Boom. And everybody who's already redlining because of everything that's been going on now has to suddenly come out of pocket on these loans as well. A lot of these things are going to be a big problem for huge portions of this country. Let's take a look at what CNN is saying is going to be expiring. They posted this January 31st. They say these benefits will disappear when Biden ends the COVID national and public health emergencies in May. That means Americans could have to start paying for their COVID testing and treatment. The White House said in a statement all this would be ending. They're going to be winding it down. Most Americans covered by Medicare and Medicaid and private insurance have been able to obtain COVID tests. Those tests were covered, but once the emergency ends, there might be some out-of-pocket costs. Vaccines will continue to be covered. State Medicaid programs will be continuing to cover. Private insurance could face charges for COVID tests. Americans with private insurance, and so on and so forth. There's Medicare provisions. We have less of an impact to public assistance programs. They say a total of roughly 15 million people could be dropped from Medicaid when the continuous enrollment requirement ends. They expanded the impact on the FDA. When the Biden administration ends the emergency, existing emergency use authorizations for COVID will not be affected. Oh, isn't that convenient? So it doesn't end the emergency use authorization for the vaccine. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration said on Tuesday that when the Biden administration ends the emergency, existing emergency use authorizations for COVID vaccine tests or treatments will not be affected, and the agency may continue to issue emergency use authorizations, even though it's not an actual emergency. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Incredible. Well, wait a minute. But there isn't an emergency. So why can you continue to use it for emergency use? Well, I don't know. It's confusing. I don't know, man. You have to forgive me. I'm not as intelligent as these FTA bureaucrats. Here, importantly, the ending of the public health emergency declared by HHS under the Public Health Service Act will not impact the ability to authorize devices, including tests, and vaccines for emergency use. Existing emergency use authorizations for products will remain in effect, and the agency may continue to issue new EUAs, which is emergency use authorization, as long as the criteria are met for issuance. But apparently one of the criteria is not an emergency. Since the start of COVID-19 public health emergency, delete that word, it has been allowed that the FDA to provide tools and flexibility to stakeholders. Yeah, in other words, we don't really care if it's an emergency or not. We just want to do it. In addition to the public health emergency, HHS has issued 2 other emergency declarations that provide broader access to medical measures for COVID. For instance, the emergency use authorization for tests and treatments are not tied to the public health emergency. Why not? Why aren't they? Shouldn't they be? Shouldn't the emergency use authorization be tied to the actual public health emergency? Is that too much to ask here? Am I living in bizarro world? Are we living in what world is this? But HHS will have to determine when the end of the declaration is that it allows their use. Many tests are available to the public under emergency use authorization, even when there isn't an emergency, though several have been granted more permanent marketing authorization by the FDA. A few therapeutics, including others, have been approved, and so these other drugs that we don't like to say here. HHS has also issued another declaration that provides liability immunity to pharmacists who administer, and that's set to expire October 2024. So all of the emergency declarations are ending except emergency use, which you can still use, and of course, liability immunity. Want to make sure that those stick around for a while. The White House weighed in because House Democrats were concerned about voting against the Republican legislation coming to the floor this week. We're going to go through that. They debated it all day today. Democrats were concerned about the optics of voting against Republicans, which is why the White House did this. They don't care about liberty or freedom or COVID or rights or pandemic or whatever that crap. They just didn't want to look bad politically. So they're ending it on Monday when the Republicans were about to debate it all today on Tuesday. As soon as we saw this bill, it obviously concerned the White House. So, it was important for them to weigh in. The administration now argues that the bills are unnecessary because we're ending the emergencies anyways. Hey, let's just be friends about this. We don't need you to go in and strip all of our powers away. Don't pass these bills that are going to claw back a bunch of stuff. Just let us end it, right? We're just going to end it and we can all just be friends. No. To be clear, continuation of these emergencies does not impose any restriction at all on the conduct, the White House said. The White House said it would extend the COVID emergencies one final time in order to ensure an orderly wind down, saying that they've been incredibly successful and that a lot of these other policies are going to exist even after the May 11th date. So we'll see. Now, that is what they're planning on doing. The Republicans are not waiting around at all. And so we're going to turn our attention over to what is happening in the House. But what about student loans? Because student loans was a question that many people had. And remember, this was also being governed by the Department of Education, and they had all different justifications under other emergency uses. And so as you can see, right, the ending of the emergency in this case doesn't really end the emergency at all. It doesn't really matter. It's just a nice, stupid headline from the Democrats, from the White House, because they're just going to say, oh, no, it's officially over on May 11th. Oh, cool. Well, does that mean that the EUA for the vaxes is also something that comes? No, doesn't. All right. Well, how about these other things? No, even student loans apparently is not going to be cut back short. Forbes reported this. They said, while the Biden administration has decided to end the COVID emergency this coming May, as reported by Politico, officials have confirmed that this won't impact the current extension of the student loan pause, which could continue to the end of June. In other words, the pause won't be cut short early as a result of the official end of the emergency. So it's like, what does the end of the emergency end? Anything? Not really. We'll see. Now, Joe Biden was asked about this, obviously. You know, he doesn't take many questions. And when he is sort of moseying over to the helicopter on the way out of the White House, he sometimes will engage strangely with the reporters on the side of the sidewalk. One of those experiences happened today. The President of the United States physically assaulted a journalist.
What's behind the decision to end the COVID emergency, Mr. President? What's behind your decision to end the COVID emergency?
Well, the emergency will end when the Supreme Court ends it. We've extended to May the 15th to make sure we get everything done. That's all. There's nothing behind the wall.
He just wanted to be dry. But, you know, he does all the touching is just a little strange with him. All right. So he does want to be dry. Now, again, that's just part of the story. We want to actually listen to what he said.
What's behind the decision to end the COVID emergency?
Question. What's behind the decision to end the COVID emergency?
Mr. President. What's behind your decision to end the COVID emergency?
Well, the emergency will end when the Supreme Court ends it. We've extended to May the 15th to make sure we get everything done.
Anybody have any idea what he just said?
Behind your decision to end the COVID emergency?
Well, the emergency will end when the Supreme Court ends it.
He said the COVID emergency is going to end when the Supreme Court ends it.
We've extended to May the 15th to make sure we get everything done. That's all. There's nothing behind the wall.
We've extended it to May 15th, did he say?
The emergency will end when the Supreme Court ends it. We've extended to May the 15th to make sure we get everything done. That's all. There's nothing behind the wall.
All right. So he's got 35 marbles in his mouth. I'm pretty sure he said May 15th. I think he said May 15th, but it's actually May 11th, evidently. So very difficult. And he says that the Supreme Court's going to end it when the Supreme Court ends it, even though he's also going to be ending it, but not really ending it. So very, very interesting things happening over there at the White House, which is why you can see the Congress is not waiting around for them to figure it out. So let's turn our attention over to some people in Congress. We'll start off with Representative Mary Miller from Illinois. She is going to introduce what Congress is doing for us. And of course, they're not waiting around. They're jumping right into it. Here is the Congresswoman.
Congresswoman Mary Miller here. I've got good news. This week, the House is going to vote to revoke Joe Biden's unconstitutional COVID powers, the powers that he doesn't want to give up. I'm very proud to join this effort, even though Joe Biden has promised to veto this bill after he declared that the pandemic is over. We're also going to vote to repeal the vaccine requirement on healthcare workers. And we're going to continue to investigate the Biden administration for the damage that they've done to our school children and for the unconstitutional vaccine mandates.
Right on, Mary. All right, so that's what they're doing over there. And they gathered together today in order to begin debating these new bills on the floor of this brand new Congress. And it started in one chamber, one committee, with a very interesting exchange between our friend James Comer and Jamie Raskin, who is formerly on the January 6th Select Committee. Mr. Comer, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, introduces the committee before he turns it over to minority member Mr. Raskin.
I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Ranking Member Jamie Raskins to introduce his members. But first, I want to publicly say, Mr. Raskins, we're all rooting for you. We know that you're going to win this battle. You're in our thoughts and prayers, and it's good to see you here today. I yield to Ranking Member Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. It means a lot to me, and I've been gratified to receive so many kind words of encouragement and sympathy from colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
Good.
And I hope that these expressions of concern and solidarity will become seeds of friendship over the year. I certainly plan on getting through this thing and beating it, and I thank you for your patience and indulgence.
Right on. Right on. Right on. Cancer sucks. Cancer sucks 100%. So we'll be supporting Raskin through his battle through the cancer as we continue to hold him accountable for his takes in Congress. And Comer sounds like he'll do the same. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic as that unfolds throughout the rest of Congress. But Jamie Raskin, hopefully he gets well soon. Cancer sucks. All right. So we've got more debate coming up. We've got Sheila Jackson Lee, who says, all right, everybody, calm down, okay? The pandemic is not over. We could all drop dead at any minute. We'll check in with Congresswomen from Florida, from Iowa, and Marjorie Taylor Greene over from Georgia, right after we talk about staying healthy and vibrant with our friends over from Brick House Nutrition, which is where you can get Field of Greens, because as you know, the pandemic is over. We've got some of those pandemic pounds, those holiday pounds, and I'm sure you're sick as I am, seeing all those ads for weight loss and fad diets, right? Been there, done that. They don't work. But you know what does? Eating healthy, 5 healthy servings of fruits and vegetables every day. You do that, the weight probably falls right off. But A, vegetables, right? Not a fan. B, who has time to prepare for that every day? Great news. Let's talk about Field of Greens, real organic superfood. Field of Greens is a science-backed formula with specific fruits and vegetables you're not going to find in any other product. Proper nutrition reboots your metabolism so you can burn calories faster and lose weight the healthier way. And Field of Greens is the only brand backed by a better health promise. Yes, you're going to look healthier, feel great, but the best proof is going to come at your next checkup with your doctor when he says, wow, you've lost weight. What are you doing? You look fabulous. Keep it up. Let's get you started today. 15% off your first order. Visit fieldofgreens.com. Use promo code Robert to save that 15% off your first order at fieldofgreens.com, where you'll just be bursting with ultra mega green nutrition and feeling super good with your superfood at Brickhouse Nutrition. All right. And so now let's go back over to Congress. Sheila Jackson Lee does not like this new Republican-controlled House of Representatives. She's very upset that the pandemic might be declared over. She says that's not true at all. In fact, the pandemic is still raging on.
We lost 1 million people on not having that vaccination timely. And so I am struck by this legislation. The pandemic is not over. 500 people a day die right now as I'm standing here from COVID. That's a reasonable amount. I know there are other infectious diseases, but doesn't it make sense that if we can have a vaccine and a protocol that allows people to live, our children, those with pre-existing conditions, that we want them to do so? The Biden administration has announced that they intend to reduce this pandemic emergency, national emergency declaration in May. It'll allow our health facilities to get themselves.
All right. So the big sort of theme that came out today during the debates was about the time, right? The Republicans want this stuff done now. They want it ended now. And the Biden people are saying, well, we need 60 days and it's got to be pushed out for a long period of time. So put a pin in that. We're going to come back because Tom Massie is going to sort of dive into that. Why do we need all this time? Why shouldn't you have been sort of winding this down a long time ago? Right? It's always 60 more days or 90 more days or another 18 more months or whatever it is. It was supposed to be 15 days to slow the spread. Hello, it's 15 years later, it feels like. It's never ending. And so it's always another 60 days, another 60 days, another 60 days. Enough already. The Republicans are in charge and they're saying we're done with it. And so it starts with this. Republicans respond. We have Representative Carmack over from Florida. She takes the podium and she says, all right, enough. It is over. We've had enough of this stuff, and it's time to put an end to it.
I will yield 2 minutes to my friend from Florida, Ms. Kamek.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 382, the Pandemic is Over Act. I want to thank my friend and colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Brett Guthrie, for leading this important effort. This action is long overdue. This week we are voting on several bills designed to do what we all in America have known for some time, that the emergency declaration should be gone away. Constituents have been asking, heck, demanding, that we end this perpetual state of COVID emergencies in the federal government and get back to normal. More than 4 months ago, President Biden declared that the COVID-19 pandemic was over. Yet, interestingly, the federal emergency declaration, it's still in place. It makes you wonder, why would the president declare that the pandemic is over, but not officially rescind the emergency declaration?
Loves that
in
COVID
fact,
money.
Many of our colleagues
Loves
on the
that
other side of
power.
the aisle seem more concerned with keeping the public health emergency in place rather than addressing the problems we are now being faced with. Things like investigating the estimated $163 billion with a B in COVID unemployment fraud and recovering those funds that were stolen from the American taxpayers.
Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in COVID fraud. Gone. Just evaporated. Where'd it go?
Or the approximately $150 billion in unobligated funds that's just sitting there for COVID. That's a pretty easy way to start reducing spending. Or how about the approximately $500 billion that's been obligated but hasn't been pushed out the door yet? Ask yourselves, who benefits from the emergency declaration remaining in place?
Democrats.
It is a fact that the continuation of the
Government.
public health
All
emergency
government.
is costing taxpayers billions of dollars and worsening already crippling inflation. Inflation which is costing Florida families in my district an estimated $10,000 extra a year in basic goods and services. I don't know anyone who can afford an extra 10 grand a year. The federal mandates like this have increased private health insurance costs and grossly exacerbated the ever-increasing national debt that will be passed on to my generation, our children, and our grandchildren. It's time to get our kids back to school, folks back to work, and life back to normal. It's time for us to turn the page and end the COVID-19 public health emergency powers. Let's get back to common sense fixes to our healthcare system. Let's get back to work on lowering energy costs. Let's get back to work. And let's get back to work in person. I yield.
Yes, end it. All right. Shout out to Kat. Very nice delivery there. Use a full amount of time. Pandemic is over. Enough of this stuff already. And it's true. Did you hear that announcement from the person holding the gavel? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Did he just say the gentlewoman is recognized in that clip? Eddie Oliver says, I thought we can't even define it that. He was an oppressive patriarch. It's true. I'm glad that you noticed that. Did she notify him about her proper introductory pronoun welcome phrases? I don't know. It's good to see you, Eddie Oliver. Thank you for the super chat. Very good question. Let's see how he does it with her. Representative Marionette Miller. She hails from Iowa, and she is somebody with what apparently is some nice background as a medical person. And she says, yeah, it's over. Enough of this stuff.
Speaker is recognized.
He called her speaker, not gentlewoman. Very curious on that one. Good eye there, Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Guthrie, for yielding me time. As both a physician and the former director of the Iowa Department of Public Health, I agree with what President Biden said in September of last year. The pandemic is over. More specifically, even though SARS-CoV-2 is still circulating, it's endemic, the public health emergency is and should be over. I'm proud to support H.R. 382, which acknowledged the truth of the president's words and finally put an end to the public health emergency. When COVID-19 first reached our shores, the Public Health Emergency Declaration was a tool that helped our country to mobilize, develop testing, develop vaccines, and to distribute PPE and institute our manufacturing sector.
I guess.
However, this emergency declaration is no longer needed, and instead of putting an end to it, the president has continually renewed it with no end in sight. For example, we have already extended telehealth for 2 years. From mask mandates and vaccine mandates to extending Medicaid expansion to previously ineligible participants and student loan forgiveness, the president and this administration are using the public health emergency to expand government overreach. What's irresponsible is not putting a transition in place during this past year.
Right now.
I urge my colleagues to support H.R.
Gentleman's
382
time
and
has
put an end to this outdated, bloated government overreach. Thank you, and I yield back.
Do you hear that guy coughing in the background as they're talking about COVID? Now, there was some bad audio on that one, but her point was right. I think she's dead right about that. She said specifically that this was a tool that was useful at one period in time. Now, you could say whether that was debatable or not, whether that was useful or not, right? The government, in my opinion, meddled a lot more than they should have. They probably caused a lot more harm than otherwise would have happened if they would have just let us all deal with it. But they caused a lot of issues. She says, okay, it was relevant at one point, not relevant anymore. I'm a medical doctor. I know exactly how this stuff works. So take my advice. And our final clip on the debate before we turn our attention over to Thomas Massie comes from Marjorie Taylor Greene. And there were several different sort of facets that they were arguing about. But another theme that we saw from the Democrats was about the right to choose and about how Republicans, they're talking about all of these mandates as being problematic, but they don't care about a woman's right to choose. And so why don't, if they're so hypocritical on that issue, how can they have any credibility on this issue? And Marjorie Taylor Greene responds to that.
Ms. Greene, gentlelady's recognized.
I rise in support for the Freedom of Healthcare Workers Act, and I'd like to take a minute to reflect on what one of my colleagues was talking about across the aisle. And that is about having the ability to choose when it comes to abortion. But yet, here's mandates that have been forced on our healthcare workers since the vaccines have been introduced through the Democrats and through the Biden administration, and it's been devastating for our healthcare industry. And it's pretty hypocritical to talk about abortion rights for healthcare workers in the workplace when they're completely against the ability of healthcare workers, who I would call the experts, doctors and nurses and people that work in the healthcare field. They have the right to choose when it comes to the vaccines. Mandates are tyrannical, and they need to end. The COVID pandemic is over, and I'm glad Republicans are making sure that we declare that this week on the House floor. I'd also like to point out that we have a severe shortage of healthcare workers, many of whom were heroes that worked on the front lines saving lives throughout this pandemic, who have said they don't want a vaccine, they do not want to take it, and they want to trust their own natural immunity. We need to give these healthcare workers the right to choose their natural immunity and not be forced to take a jab or a vaccine that they know they do not need and they do not want. We believe in freedom here in the Republican conference. We believe in freedom for Americans. We believe in freedom for the healthcare workers of this country, and I yield back.
Nice statement from Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying that the mandates devastated the industry, and I think a lot of people would agree with that in different parts of the healthcare industry. And of course, right, as we're talking about all of this stuff, right, make sure that you are following the CDC guidelines and the World Health Organization guidelines and all of those things. I just say that for the YouTube guidelines, the YouTube rules out there. But, it is curious now because we're going to see whether or not this is acceptable by the CDC now, right? Is the CDC also going to come out and declare that the pandemic is over? Is that going to be official guidance now? The White House said it's over. Does the science match the White House statements, Because we have to adhere to the CDC and to the World Health Organization. So what is it? Is the CDC official now too? Is the World Health Organization agree with the White House? I don't know. So as always, our YouTube censor is always screaming at me about the COVID rules. And so, check with whatever the World Health Organization and the CDC says. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and a lot of these other representatives seem to say the pandemic's over. But they agree with Joe Biden. He says the pandemic's over. The White House themselves made it official policy that the pandemic is going to be over in May. I don't know if the science is going to catch up to that announcement, though, or if they know something like, does something like expire on something on the May 11th? I don't know. Science is very complicated. Obviously, I don't understand it. Let's see if Thomas Massie can help us explain why the pandemic suddenly ends on a certain date and why it has to be 60 days from now.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
As the second sponsor of this bill, I'm very excited to see it moving here in Congress. It is long overdue. And the other side of the aisle walked into this room tonight fully prepared to be diametrically opposed to it. But the administration threw him a curveball. The administration is in full retreat at this moment, and so they have to retreat with the administration.
They're trying to preempt the Republicans, right? They came out on a Monday knowing that the public is really sick of COVID stuff, knowing the Republicans are going to catch a big windfall if they're allowed to capture this issue. And so they tried to preempt them and try to pre-butt them before they even got off the ground.
I believe the administration would not have done this tonight. I mean, if you think it's a coincidence, I think you're a coincidence theorist. It is no coincidence that while we were debating these very measures, the executive branch went into full retreat on this. They're actually trying to save, I think, the other side of the aisle from taking a tough vote, saving some face so that they can vote against it because, well, the timing's not right.
Yeah, and this is what matches that CNN article that we already read through. They said that Democrats were pounding on the door of the White House, sort of panicked about this, saying, what are we going to do? We got to go in there and vote to continue COVID in our districts? We're going to get slaughtered on this thing. So the White House made an about-face rapidly.
And then there was the argument made tonight on this bill and the one preceding it that does something similar, that we should wait until we have committees formed. The American people cannot wait another week. They cannot wait another day. Livelihoods have been ruined. So many people have suffered because this has gone on too long. The president said, what was it, to CBS 60 Minutes months ago, that the pandemic is over. And now he's saying, well, we need just 60 more days.
Broken
60
records.
more days.
For 3 years.
To pull this off. Now that you all have this idea that we should end it, I think I'll end it, and I need 60 days. I would like to ask Mr. Larson, the president in his statement of administrative policy says he needs 60 days. He wants to honor his previous commitment to give at least 60 days notice prior to termination. Why is he then going to go 100 days from now to do it? What's the...
If they need 60 days from now, why not just go 60 days from now? Why are we going to May?
Spoke to the president about that. My guess is that since the national emergency order signed by the previous president was on March 13th, 2020, that about 60 days from March 13th is around May 11th, and that'd be my only speculation. I'll give it a try.
I'm trying to. I see that the thing...
They just picked a date. They just threw a date at a dartboard, and they said, that sounds good. Just start it.
Are going to expire on March 1st and April 11th. So if he's going 60 days from April 11th, April, help me out here.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't told there would be math.
April,
That's my kind of fella.
May, June. 60 days from April.
Somebody get a
11th
calendar.
June 11th, I think.
And a slide rule.
June 10th.
And a
then,
calculator.
March 1st, 60 days from that, it'd be April, it'd be May 1st. So, I don't know, I'm having a problem with the math. I don't think this has ever been about math. I don't think it's ever been about science. I think it's been about politics. And I would just say, you know, we don't need to beat a dead horse. All these mandates and all these emergency things, they're dead. But elections have consequences. If you're watching this tonight, or you watch the vote tomorrow, and you see that the White House is in full retreat on this issue, it's because he's lost the confidence of the American people on this issue, and he knows it. We should have had a vote on this emergency. We should have a vote on I know
everything.
Your topic's not the mandates, but we talked about it tonight. Congress should have been voting on this. We should have been.
All the time. They didn't do any of that. They just gobbled up power. Remember when the CDC came out and they said, oh, yeah, your property, you know, your property that you own, that like you have renters in and stuff like that, it's not your property anymore. It's our property. You can't throw people out. Remember when you had problems with what was happening in the schools and you sort of to object to it, or you objected to the mandates or the threats to your job and your livelihood. And there were idiots all over the place screaming, jumping around, dancing on people's graves, having fun with it. Saying, well, maybe if you were somebody who was sophisticated and followed the science, you'd just get jabbed 37 times like the rest of us, right? On and on and on. Nobody voted for any of it. They all just did it under emergency, this, that, or the other. And they've been doing it for 3 years. And every time we get to the end of the line, they need another 60 days. Another 60 days for 3 years.
And having hearings, but we couldn't have them. And so forgive us, Mr. Chairman, please, and Ranking Member, if it seems like we're moving too quickly because the American people think we're moving too slowly. And I would suggest that these bills probably don't go far enough. The next thing that needs to happen is to remove the emergency use authorization for some of this. I call it medical malpractice martial law.
Martial
People
law.
Are, actually, I have a constituent. She went into the hospital for a test. They stuck the swab so far up her nose, they punctured the membrane that keeps your brain fluid in, and it leaked into her throat. They had to do surgery to fix it. She hired an attorney, and he said, I'm sorry, we can't help you because of the PrEP Act. So it doesn't just apply to vaccines right now. It applies to the masks you wear. It applies to that. You have to prove somebody willfully tried to hurt you. So in order to claim any damages under this medical malpractice martial law that we're living in, and I hope pretty soon, after we get HJ Res 7 done, and after we get the other things done, that will end something that's gone on way too long, which is the boot of the federal government on the American people, saying it's in the name of their own good, when in fact it's not in their own good. I hope as soon as we get this done, we move on to all the other things that need to end. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Larson, to your...
Horrific, right? No liability. None of that's apparently going to end. So any problems from any of the medical procedures that are covered under the PrEP Act, Tom Massie says, there's complexities there that are going to continue to protect people. And so we have questions, right? Where are the lines? What does the ending of the pandemic, according to the White House, actually mean if a lot of the EUAs and a lot of these other pandemic excuses can't also expire? They keep the power, but they end it officially? How does that work? Well, of course, we will continue to cover it. And I hope you join us as we do. Thank you for liking this video and subscribing to make sure you don't miss the next one. And we will continue to follow. I look forward to seeing you as we do.